Fabulous. Thank you everyone for joining us. A very warm welcome to our first in a series of RARE REV-inars, where today we're going to be talking all things early access. I'm Nicola Miller, Creative Director at Rare Revolution magazine, and in the background working on the tech today, I'm joined by my colleague Becky Pender. Today's session, which is in partnership with Tanner Pharma Group, is a multi-stakeholder look at early access pathways. We're thrilled to have had so many people register for today, and would really encourage you to get involved in the pop-up polls that we're going to have throughout the session. And please do drop any questions in the Q&A area, and we'll endeavour to answer those at the end of the session. If we don't manage to get all of the questions answered today, we will follow up with responses from the panellists afterwards. So please do feel free to put your questions in. Today's session will also be available to revisit on demand post the event, and we will share the link to that with you all in due course. I'm really delighted to be joined by a very knowledgeable and international lineup today who will help guide us through the topic of early access. John Legas, Executive Vice President of Business Development at Tanner Pharma, David Caponera, Executive Director Patient Advocacy at Novo Nordisk, Professor Anib Das, Head of Pediatric Metabolic Medicine, Department of Pediatrics, Hanover Medical School, Dr. Famida Gwadri-Sridhar, Founder and CEO of Pulse InfoFrame, Roberta Smith, the President of the Alagille Syndrome Alliance, and Dawn Sullivan, Global Medical Affairs at Ultragenyx. Hello all and welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Today we're going to kick off things with a brief presentation from John on what is an early access program, or EAP, and designing for the unmet needs. So John, if I may pass to you, over to you for a brief introduction, please.
Great, thank you, Nicola. Becky, if you can put the slides up, please. While Becky's doing that, I'm just going to, a few things about Tanner Pharma Group. So Tanner is a US-based company located in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have offices in Brazil, Ireland, UK, and Switzerland. The business was founded in 2002, so we are celebrating our 20th year. Next slide, please. Our why, or our core purpose as a business, is to improve lives by increasing access to medicines around the world. And our mission is we relentlessly pursue and deliver innovative solutions that support patients in need. And our approach, we do that through partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, through patient groups, through hospitals, physicians, NGOs, whichever stakeholders have an interest in helping get medicine to patients somewhere in the world. And that's why today's REV-inar is so exciting for us. Next slide, please. The business at Tanner, just last slide about Tanner, but we have 4 business units. The first is what we call our Tanner CTS, and that's a business focused on finding and sourcing comparators for clinical trials, clinical labeling and clinical packaging, and shipping to sites around the world, clinical material. Our Tanner LAC business focuses on in-licensing, registering, and commercializing products in Latin America. And then we have 2 business units focused on early access, our Tanner GAP and our Tanner MAP, the whole kind of theme of today. Next slide, please. So what are some of the trends impacting access to medicines around the world? Well, first of all, there are many more treatments being developed for rare diseases than ever compared to, say 10 years ago. And with the internet and access to information, rare disease patients around the world have so much access to what's happening with their disease, drugs that may be available or drugs in development. The reality, though, is that given low prevalence rates of some diseases, medicines that treat many rare diseases may only be available in a limited number of markets commercially. So if you can imagine you're a patient with a rare disease and you're unable to join a clinical trial, that medicine is not available commercially in the country you live, then what's your options? And so luckily over the last 25 years, this idea of early access has evolved and continues to evolve as time goes on. And the good thing that I've seen in my kind of 16 years in this space is that more and more pharmaceutical companies are much more willing to make their innovative medicines available in this type of fashion. That's really a good thing for rare disease patients all over the world. Next slide, please. This is not meant to take a deep dive, just kind of trying to give a general concept, but the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations each year publishes its patient weight indicator, where weight stands for waiting to access innovative therapies. And the green bars represent all the different countries of Europe. And what this data show is that from the year, all medicines that were approved by the European Medicines Agency between 2017 and 2020, how many of them were available in each of the countries as of January 1st, 2022. And of the 57 medicines that were approved by EMA, 54 were available in Germany. So if you're a rare disease patient in Germany, you've had a pretty good run in terms of access to medicines. Not quite so good if you're in countries like Denmark, Italy, Austria, France, we're low 40s, UK 35, Spain 25 of those medicines available 5 years later. Nordics, low 20s. You get to countries like Estonia, 6, Latvia, 2, Lithuania, 1. So you can imagine, even when you have a centralized approval in Europe, that means the registration covers all countries. Medicines just aren't available commercially across all those countries. So it poses a real problem for rare disease patients in particular, and hence the reason for the need for things like early access programs. Next slide, please. So just briefly, what's the difference between a clinical trial and early access? In clinical trials, the objective is really research, extensive and controlled data capture, tight enrollment criteria from an eligibility perspective, and a defined number of patients and geography. In early access, the clear objective is treatment. And Famita will talk a little bit later about real world data, but data capture in this setting is much more ad hoc, and safety data is something that is required. But the eligibility criteria in these programs tends to expand over time as more and more is known about a particular medicine, and the number of patients and geography tends to be unlimited. Next slide, please. Most countries of the world do have a pathway to allow this type of access for a patient to get access if that medicine isn't available in the country where they live or it's still in clinical trials. However, the legislation does vary significantly by country, but one of the core tenets is that a physician is really required to obtain permission for a particular patient and have that medicine imported for their patient. The physician may need to provide, kind of a clinical justification for why his or her patient needs access to the medicine via this pathway. And it should be noted too that just because a pathway exists doesn't guarantee that the patient will definitely get it, because there may be other factors such as funding and funding availability to purchase the medicine. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Nicola.
Thanks so much, John. I think that was really helpful in setting the scene, so I really appreciate that. We're going to go to a quick poll first, just to find out the level of kind of engagement in terms of expertise and experience within the audience. So Becky, if you can pop up our first poll, which is, have you been involved in an early access program before? Yes or no? It's a nice simple one to start us off. Okay, so while you're all filling that in, I am going to go to our first question. We've got a lot to get through, so let's dive in while that's being completed. It's really right that we should, here we go, so that's come up. So actually 61% of you have had involvement in an early access program, so that's great. 39%, 40% no. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see the questions that come out of this, see whether it changes any insights you've got or whether you find real value in what you've learned today. So let's get started as we mean to go on, which quite rightly is with patients first. So Roberta, I'm going to come to you. In your experience, how important is it to engage with the patient groups early on in an EAP? And if so, what time is the right time to do that?
Thank you, Nicola. I honestly, I'm such a cheerleader for pharma getting involved with patient groups pre-clinical trial. If we want to go way back, we can deeply get involved with so many things preclinical trial, even as much as protocols, recruiting for clinical trials. And then in terms of the EAP, patient groups are extremely important in the process of EAP and recruiting families into the EAP and educating the communities. I think it's just critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you share how the Alagille Syndrome Alliance have helped patients access through an EAP? I think you've got some direct experience there. So can you talk us through that?
Absolutely. First of all, a patient advocacy organization has a pulse on the community, and not only a local community to the clinical trial sites, but also globally in terms of, international. John had a graph up there where some of these countries do not have access, and we're talking Estonia, Latvia, and so on and so forth. And I can give a perfect example that I've been able to help facilitate connections with individuals in these countries, one-on-one, case by case. Estonia is one example. I was able to facilitate connection with a mom looking for medication to the company and her doctors. I've also been able to do that with patients in Slovakia, just countries that don't have these opportunities. And it's because we monitor our support groups very closely. We hear what people are saying, see what they're saying, reach out to them, but we also distribute information. And that is very important. We make sure that that information is translated. We ask the companies to translate that, and we play a significant role in educating the patients in a way that the companies cannot do that. We also open the doors for connections to these patients and these companies in ways that they can, one-on-one participate in events where the patients are, and online events. And this creates relationships with the companies for the sake of the EAP and recruiting, and to involve the patients and educate them as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the translation, having that information in other languages is really key, isn't it? Because often we forget about that and we think everything, English is kind of the king here, but it's not, making sure that families can access it, the information to lead them to that point is really important. So thank you for doing that, Roberta. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If I can come to you then, Dave, in terms of what other best practice we might be able to use in relation to engaging patient groups, what would you suggest to pharma companies that would be looking to run an EAP as to how they could, what's the best practice for them engaging with these patient groups like Roberta?
Sure. So obviously, as we are looking at the different therapies, understanding what the current treatments are, and really engaging with the patient group to understand sort of what their needs are. Also, really making sure internally that our clinical and medical areas are understanding what the needs of the patients are on that. If they're, our goal is, if we're having clinical studies, obviously we'd like to have the clinical studies enrolled, and we usually set up programs to get patients to the clinical sites, especially in the rare and ultra rare areas. One of the things really is to be in dialogue, as Roberta said, be in dialogue with the patient group to understand and really connect, let them know what we're doing, where we are, our clinical studies, and also all the nuances. It takes a bit to set up a clinical study in each country, and where and how we do that. The other thing is really, if the company can have again, I'm biased, a patient advocacy person, or working through the public affairs person to really build that connection and stay connected to the patient group to let them know about the studies. And if you have started an EAP program, you're not supposed to advertise the EAP program, but working with their HCPs to let them know and all of that.
Yeah, it's quite a key role, isn't it? The patient engagement role. I think, a few years ago, it was very rare to find that in pharma, that designated role, but now it's becoming the other way. It's unusual not to find it, which is, is fantastic, because it's a very key role and pivotal in that conduit of communication.
It's the way you started the webinar. We're saying it is about the patient and really what needs to be done. And as Roberta has said, exactly. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dave. And Roberta, what advice would you give to other patient groups or patients that are looking for access because there may be a new therapeutic on the horizon? Obviously it brings a lot of interest when that is the case, but what advice can you give to other groups that can see that coming ahead?
staying connected with the company and sharing the company's successes through the drug development process within the community is enormous, because patients need to understand over time who these companies are, what they're doing, how they've succeeded, and the progress of the drug development. I mean, sometimes drug development can take upwards of 10 years, and patients lose sight of the companies and their progress if we don't stay connected and inform always the successes. And that's with press releases, that's with engagement opportunities, it's keeping the companies engaged in the events that you're doing. I just think that's such a key thing. Always know what is happening.
And also, I guess, going to the company, if they don't come to you to tell you what's happening, don't be afraid to go to them and say, look, we've seen this is, this is in your pipeline, and try, not be afraid to open up that dialogue yourself if it's not forthcoming.
It is truly such a disservice to the patient community if there's not a great relationship between the patient advocacy and the company.
Yeah, 100%.
And I can attest to that. Roberta has constantly been trying to connect with me, and I've tried to keep her informed too. So yes, I can attest to that. So
that's very good to hear, Dave. When it works well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, that's going to lead us on to another poll that Becky's going to pop up for us. So how easy have you found it to get information about and education about an EAP? So has it been easy within your community, found lots of information, somewhat difficult, or really difficult to find reliable, credible information about an EAP within your community or your space?